Introductions. I have Deputy Secretary Lindsay Douglas.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, is the mic on? I'm sorry, I'm not catching the request.
Yes, it is now. Sorry. Thought it was already on. Okay. Well, the revisers guys didn't even get to hear me say thank you. So thank you to you guys on there. I did say that. We're requesting introduction of RS 0899. And what this bill will do is tweak a few things from the tolling legislation that was passed in 2019. The three things that we're trying to accomplish have kind of arisen as we've started in a conversation with Overland Park, looking at whether or not tolling would be a good option for some expanded capacity on US 69. The three things that it would do is give the secretary authority to contract with the KTA, just kind of explicit authority on the toll collection. The other two things relate to transit, allowing transit vehicles to operate in that managed lane without the toll, and then for what toll revenues could be used for. If the way it reads now, we would keep it within the project limits. We've had some conversations with Overland Park to think about, future needs on the corridor and if some of that revenue could be used in other locations along US 69. So those are the three things that the bill will do. I'd be happy to stand for any questions.
Are there questions? Representative Delperding.
Thank you, Chairman. Not a question, more a comment, just kind of a follow-up. Could you restate your name and who you're with now that the microphone's on?
Absolutely. Lindsay Douglas, Deputy Secretary of KDOT. Thank you.
Any questions? Hearing none. Is there objection? Hearing no objection, it's introduced. Thank you. Representative Auerkamp.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to request introduction of RS 0761. This bill relates to abandoned and towed vehicles. It would require an individual or an agency to get a certificate of title before selling the abandoned or towed vehicle.
Okay. Are there questions? Hearing none, is there objection? Hearing no objection, it is introduced. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And committee, I'd like to propose 21 RS 0782. That is an act regarding salvage vehicles, excluding the airbag repair from the definition of the cost of repairs when determining whether a vehicle is totaled or not.
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Representative Sutton. Is this the same bill that we dealt with last year?
It is exactly the same.
Okay, and why are you not on this committee again to push it through? You missed.
They needed me in commerce. I'm sorry.
I thought you just missed our license plate debates.
Well, and there was that too, but mostly because they needed me in commerce.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you. But I just make you nervous. He's frowning like, why am I objecting? I'm not objecting. I'm just giving you a hard time.
Well, I expect no less.
I have no objections. I just wanted to watch you squirm a little bit.
Very good.
All right.
I started to on the inside there a little bit.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there objections? Hearing none, without objections, it's introduced.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and committee.
Representative Rogers.
it's a different light. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciated my time on this committee. Representative Ballard, you haven't moved from the last time when I was sitting next to you, or Representative Francis, but time goes. Mr. Chairman, I would like to introduce RS 0763. Has to do with renaming a short stretch of state highway by the Norton Correctional Facility in Norton, based on a young man that lived in my district, was a guard for the state of Kansas, and leaving work about a year or so ago, pulled out and was killed in a traffic accident. And he made an impact on a lot of the prisoners. The prisoners are the ones that are proposing this and raising the funds for this. So I ask for your support in RS 0763.
Are there questions? Hearing none. Is there objection? Hearing no objection, it is introduced. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Are there other introductions to Representative Coleman? I think your mic is off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for recognizing me. I have a request for bill introduction. I would like to introduce RS 0991. This bill would create certain consumer protections and give consumers more options when purchasing a motor vehicle.
Okay. Are there questions? Hearing none, is there objection? So if no objection, it is introduced. Thank you.
Thank you, committee.
Does anyone else have a bill that they would like to introduce today? Okay, hearing none. We'll open the hearing on House Bill 2164. Revisor Wagner, would you brief us on that, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris Wagner from the Revisor's Office. House Bill 2164 requires drivers to proceed with due caution when passing any stationary vehicle displaying hazard lights on a highway. The bill also would create a corresponding traffic infraction for violating that provision. So Section 1 starts off with anytime the driver approaches a stationary vehicle displaying hazard warning signal lamps, that means they must take one of two actions. Subsection A1 states that if a driver is traveling on a highway with at least two lanes going in the same direction, then that driver must, change lanes away from the stationary vehicle. They should change lanes if possible, and as the bill states, with due regard to the road, weather, and traffic conditions. Then further on in subsection A2, if the driver is not traveling on a highway with two lanes, or it's unsafe to change lanes, then the driver must proceed with due caution, reduce the speed of their vehicle, and maintain a safe speed, again, factoring in the road, weather, and traffic conditions. The section 2 is where the new penalty can be found on page 7 of the bill. The penalty is $45. I'd be happy to answer any questions the committee has.
Representative Helgerson.
Can you please define, or is it defined anywhere, what vehicle hazard warning signal lamps are? And
Yes,
the reason for the question is, City of Wichita has given a few citations in the past for lights of different colors. Yesterday, we heard that the morticians wanted to have lamps of purple and another color on companion vehicles. I think that there's a statute, or at least some of the law enforcement have a definition that it is only red and I don't know what other colors. So is there anything in statute that says what colors?
So in line 9 of the bill, you can see it's in KSA 8-1722, which is where vehicular hazard warning lamps are defined. Well, I don't know if they're quite defined, but they are described. It says the lamp showing to the front. Let me read that and get back to you if you don't mind. I don't want to misspeak right here.
Representative Helgerson.
And I know of people in Wichita that have been ticketed for different lights on their vehicles. And since we have another bill that someone suggested having different colors on, we probably need to know what is a hazard light and what color it consists of, and is there a standard for the state? I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I could jump back in
Sure.
after reading a little further. It seems like any hazard lights that are displayed from the rear of the vehicle shall show simultaneously flashing amber or red lights or any shade of color between amber and red. So, there you go.
Anything further, Representative Helgerson? Okay. Are there further questions for the reviser? Seeing none, we'll move on to our first proponent, Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Chairman. And just a question, you want me to do it here or you want me to step up there?
Wherever you're more comfortable.
I'm fine either way. So this is a bill I actually introduced last year, and it just, because of the time constraints and the COVID, it never went anywhere. But I meant for it to be substantially similar to when approaching an emergency vehicle on the roadside. If, it's in statute now that if you approach an emergency vehicle, if it's on a 4-lane highway, you will move over to the adjacent lane. You will slow down and proceed with caution. Or if it's a 2-lane road, again, as the reviser said, to slow down and proceed with caution. It's just been one of those things I've seen for a while, but it kind of came to a head. It was February 18th of 19. It was a Monday morning. I was en route up here. I struck a deer on the turnpike, and the vehicle directly behind me hit that same deer again. So we both pulled over. Nobody was hurt, but we pulled over to assess the situation. And we were there on the roadside for approximately an hour with flashers on, several people present, and I'd say only about 20% of the vehicles that were passing actually moved over. These vehicles were approaching us at speeds of approximately 80 miles per hour, and they were whizzing by at 2 feet away from us. They just seemed to have no cares there was an accident out there and that people were out and about on foot. And it was not until the troopers finally showed up with their lights, then people started moving over to the other lanes, and it got a little safer situation. So I just thought, to me, it's only common sense. If you need to do it for an emergency vehicle, you should do it for another situation where you got people on the side of the road. A life is a life. I stand for questions.
Are there questions for Representative Delperdang? Hearing none, you must have done a great job. Are there any other proponents that would wish to speak? I have no more listed. Seeing none, I have no opponents listed. Does anyone wish to speak as an opponent? I have no neutral listed. Does anyone wish to speak as a neutral? Hearing none, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 2164, and we'll open the hearing on House Bill 2165. Revisor Wagner.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris Wagner from the Revisor's Office again. House Bill 2165 modifies the definition of antique vehicle or antique for the purposes of antique vehicle registration. Current law provides in 8-166 that antique means any vehicle more than 35 years old, propelled by a motor using petroleum, fuel, steam, or electricity, or any combination thereof. House Bill 2165 would modify that term and add a clause at the end so that the definition of antique would apply to those vehicles more than 35 years old, regardless of the age or type of components or equipment installed on the vehicle. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Question from Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chris, for that. This looks pretty familiar. I assume we had this last year. What was the fate of it?
Yes, this is the exact same language as House Bill 2528, which passed out of this committee and passed the House 124-1. It had a hearing in the Senate committee, but obviously, like many bills, COVID hit. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are there further questions for the reviser? Seeing none, we'll move to the proponents. First proponent I have is Representative Delperdang.
Thank you again, Chairman. Yeah, in response to Representative Hoheisel too, HB 2165 does replace 2528 from last year. Currently, the Kansas statutes define an antique vehicle as being more than 35 years old and as close as possible to original without any significant alterations to any of the major components. 2165 requires the vehicle to be more than 35 years old, regardless of the age of the components installed. In this hobby, many of the newer and upgraded parts, they're placed on older vehicles for safety reasons. Items such as tires, brakes, rotors, axles, glass, etc., are all placed on the vehicle also, and other parts are also placed on it for aesthetic purposes such as chrome, wheels, lights, or other interior components. But in many cases, the aftermarket parts are placed on a vehicle simply because these older vehicles do not have original replacement parts available for them. So since 1954, there is one feature on many antique autos that have not been altered or changed under federal law. That feature is known as the VIN number, or the vehicle identification number. And that item alone contains the vehicle information, including the year it was manufactured. In the case of vehicles equipped with a VIN, that needs to be the determining factor of the year of the vehicle and the antique status. Now, there are vehicles prior to 1954 that do not have necessarily that on there. And for those, it needs to be the year, excuse me, the year of original manufacture that is the determining factor on it. So this bill also brings Kansas in line with many other states that allow antique vehicles to be defined by their age, regardless of the type of the age of the equipment actually installed on the vehicle. And then, if I may, I got an email, if it's okay to read the thing, or parts of it, okay? And I'll definitely keep this shorter too. But this is from Tim Devlin. He owns Devlin Rods and Customs in Wichita. And it was sent to me, and it was for too long, those of us in the automotive industry and hobby have had to battle it out with state troopers on whether or not our old car qualifies as an antique. If something was slightly off or the trooper couldn't find your number, you were sent to the back of the line and had to try it all over again. All we want is to enjoy our old cars and without the worry of whether or not they can be titled in our own state. And goes on saying, trust me, no one wants to have a state trooper drill a couple of holes in your door jamb and see a new plate riveted in place next to a perfectly good manufacturer's plate just because it had a new engine installed in the vehicle. Skipping down further, I understand these old cars are a waste of money to a lot of people, but to those of us that are truly passionate about the hobby, know the damage that has been caused by our current law. Anytime someone I know buys a new classic car, we always have a good laugh about what experience they're going to have trying to get the title work done. And that it is so true. Also, if I may, I've got a document here that just gives a little bit of history and information on vehicle VIN numbers I'd love to pass out to you. And I stand for questions.
Further questions for the representative? Seeing none, Here's everybody satisfied. So we will move on to our next conferee is Joshua Blick from Wichita, Kansas. And I understand he's going to visit us by WebEx. Welcome to the committee.
Joshua, can you make sure that your speaker is on?
Okay, at this point in time, we will move on to our next proponent, Mr. Ray Wilk, Topeka. Welcome. Retired, is that correct? Retired, is that correct?
Yeah, that's official, yes.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Ray Wilk. I'm a resident here in Topeka, Kansas. I am submitting testimony today as an individual. The reason I want to point that out is I've been before this committee many times in the past as a member of the Kansas Division of Vehicles. I've been retired from the division since 2015. I'm here today to testify in regards to 2165, amending the definition of an antique vehicle in the state of Kansas. I am a proponent of the intent of this bill, but I have some suggestions about a different manner in which to approach this definition of antiques and street rods, because we're dealing basically with these two types of vehicles and doing away with one of them without mentioning it in the bill. Again, the definition of antique is in KSA 8-166, and the definition of a street rod is in 8-195. As written, the new definition of an antique is open-ended. Why? As amended, a vehicle can be an antique regardless of the age or type of components or equipment installed on the vehicle. How many of these parts have to be from the original antique? How are you going to determine, which has been brought up, so I'll still say this, but it's been brought up, how are you going to determine what the age of the vehicle is? Now, as far as the 1954, that's when VIN numbers come into existence. That's true. Everything before that ran off the engine numbers, which made it really difficult because if you changed out the motor, even if you changed out a 1952 motor with another 1952 motor, it had a different motor number, which meant you changed the number of the vehicle, which is one of the reasons they went to VIN numbers, because motors blow up and they get changed. You don't just trash a car because the motor went out. The issue with defining a street rod, which again is in 8-195, is currently written. If you have a vehicle that is 1949 and older, which has been modified or altered so it doesn't meet the definition of antique, it is a street rod. That creates a problem of all the vehicles from 1950 up to 1986 today that have been modified that cannot be a street rod and cannot be an antique. They're stuck in limbo. They don't qualify for either one of those, which for many, many years, even when I was working in division of vehicles, I wanted to address that because it's not fair, especially for all the 1950s that have been heavily modified and turned into hot rods, street rods. You know, it can't be an antique and it can't be a street rod, but there's a lot of them out there. My testimony is, like I said, I have a proposal which is attached to my testimony about making some different changes to the statutes. I have missed on amending the definition of antique to not put the major component parts into that definition, which I have in street rods. This addresses the fact that if you do change out the tires, the wheels, the brakes, the rear end, the complete inside the interior take out the steering wheel and put a smaller steering wheel, because some of those old vehicles have really huge steering wheels. You can take all that out and put in new. You just, major component parts, to make it very simple, which are defined in 8-2401 II, are the body, the frame, motor, and drivetrain. You put air conditioning in there, that's not a major component part. You change out the wheels and tire, not a major component part. So you can make all those changes, and it's still, it's inside of what's allowed. You start changing out the frame, change out the body, you're starting to play around with the design of that vehicle as it was manufactured. In my opinion, that's not an antique. Last year, when I was testifying on 2528, I made an example. I have a 1935 Plymouth. It's a street rod. It's got a 350 heavy modified Chevy motor in it. The front third and the rear third of the frame are out of an S10 pickup. The rear end's out of an S10 pickup, and it's got a 4-speed automatic transmission in it. The only thing left on that car that's still from 1935 is the body and the center third of the frame. That is commonly also referred to as Detroit steel. In those old cars, Detroit steel means that's original. And then those cars are heavy, because back then they made steel that was still good steel. Anyway, if I made the example last year, I could take the body off my 35 street rod and drop it on top of a 2020 Corvette. Theoretically, it would fit. It would be 1935, antique. Drivetrain, the frame, the brakes, basically the thing that makes that car go would all be brand new. And it would be titled and taxed and registered as an antique. I'd pay $12.50 a year taxes and $40 once for registration. It's a lifetime registration on an antique. I have a brand new car. Since that time, and I got a few laughs when I brought that up last year, and I agree. But since that time, I've discovered there's actually a term for doing exactly what I made an example of last year. It's called a restro mod. Restro mod means restoration and modification. Restore, you paint the body, take it off and put it on top of a brand new frame and motor. You got a restro mod. It's not an antique. Restro mods basically are street rods. At least I would call them that. Anyway, so what I'm looking at, I am suggesting is modify the definition of street rod, change the age out, take the 49 out, and make it the same as an antique. So if it's an antique, has it been modified or not? If it's modified, you're a street rod. If it's not, you're an antique. They pay the same taxes. They pay the same registration fees. The only thing is you call them two different things. The reason for that is antiques, by nature, are rare, and the older they get, theoretically, the more valuable they should become. If you decide not to adapt the suggestion, then you still probably would think about amending the current bill to delete the reference to street rods, because they won't exist anymore. I'll take my street rod and I'll title it as an antique. Saves me registration every year. I'll pay $40 and I'm done. So, and one little other item, just for the point, make a point. Statute, most people, if you ask them what the age on a antique is, they'll tell you it's 35 years old or older. Statute says more than 35 years. I worked in the division of vehicles for several years, a couple of decades actually. And if you'd called me, I said, yeah, but when it hits 35, you can do it. If you read the law, it's more than means it's 36. We've always done it that way. We're not going to change that. At least that's what we decided when I was working in vehicles, because you'd have had people in here lined up when that changed. So the genie was out of the bottle. We left it as it was. But since you're opening up the statute for changes, you might want to look at that too, to take out more than and just say 35 and older and get rid of the more than. I appreciate the opportunity to present my testimony. I'm glad to stand for questions.
I was making notes, I'm sorry. Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your testimony. I don't know if it's fair to, yeah, I'm sorry.
looking
This
up
is,
there.
yeah, this is testimony in the round. That's what we're doing here. I don't know if this is fair to ask you or if this is a question for the revisor, but so I'm a classic car nut. And when if I buy a car out of state and I bring it to the state troopers to have them do the check so that they can title it, they check the VIN number on the vehicle and they check the VIN number on the engine. And just by sheer luck, every vehicle I've ever bought out of state brought here, they matched because there's an original engine. But my first question is, what happens if they don't match? What are they supposed to do? And my second question is, does this statute change that in any way?
I can answer that. At least I can answer it from experience. If you notice on my testimony, there's a picture of my car on it. Okay, I bought that out of Wisconsin. That car is what's called a clean shaved car, which means if you look at it, there's no door handles on that car. Nothing sticks out off the body except for really the headlights. The taillights, they're recessed into the body. The license plate's recessed. The motor, the doors you have to open by electronic button on the firewall. There's nothing on that firewall. All the brakes and everything are underneath that car. That meant they took the VIN number off. I had to take that car to court. I had to get a quiet title. I knew that when I bought it because I worked in division vehicles, so I knew what kind of a problem I was buying. But that's the answer. That car did not have a VIN number on it that matched the number from Wisconsin. I had a Wisconsin title, but nothing on that title matched on the car because it wasn't there. The guy in Wisconsin asked him if he can get inspected and have Wisconsin assign a VIN number. Little history here, Wisconsin, the whole state has 3 inspection stations for the whole state. It was a 6-month wait, and that car would have been modified with seat belts and all safety standards, so they wouldn't inspect it. I'm like, I'm not waiting that, and I'll deal with it here in Kansas, so I did. But that's, yeah, if the numbers don't match, you got to go to court. Again, as somebody who worked in vehicles, I knew what I needed in that court order. Not only did I have the court order the Department of Revenue to issue title, I had a court order that told the Highway Patrol stick a VIN number on that thing. So they put it where they asked me, where do you want it? I said, put it on the frame. So it's on the frame. But yeah, that's what happened.
And so does this bill, does that change that in any way, or is it just as screwed up as it is now?
It won't change that even as it is written. In my amendment, it won't change that. You got to have a number on it to control it.
But if the question I'm asking, if the vehicle has a VIN and the VIN doesn't match the VIN on the motor, is the question I was asking. I don't know what happened because it's never happened to me, but.
I don't know what they're matching off that title to the motor unless it's over 55. And it's actually 50, Ford's 1 year different than everybody else. I can't remember which way it is. 54 for everybody else, and I think it's 55 for Ford, or it might be 53. Excuse me, that doesn't matter, but you're correct. 54, give or take, depending on what kind of car you got. They have to go off motor because there was no VIN. Everything past 54, theoretically, should have VIN numbers on it. And I don't know what the patrol's checking off the motor if it's got a VIN attached to it. That's the control number, not the motor. Now, I say that and I can think as I'm talking, they're looking to see if you change the motor out. They're looking for a modification.
So if this statute is passed, they just won't do that check anymore because it doesn't matter what engine it has.
But it wouldn't matter at the motor because it says it doesn't matter where the parts are aged, where they come from.
Thank you.
So we'll take care of that.
We got to where I was trying to
Okay,
get.
I'm sorry.
Thank you very much. No, I appreciate it. This is complicated.
Yeah.
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This question is actually for the reviser. Chris, you know in last year's bill if it was also more than 35 years?
Let me pull it up. I believe it's, yeah, it was also more than 35 years. We didn't modify that.
Okay, the reason I was asking because I remember last year there was some talk of maybe moving the year limit, and I wanted to keep it at 35 years because at that time I was 34 years old and I did not want to be considered an antique. I am now 35 years old, and this gentleman's telling me that it's more than 35 years, so I don't believe I am yet an antique. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are there further questions for Mr. Wilk? Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I was looking at the revisers or the fiscal note on this, and it's 1.9 million. The street rod designation that you're talking about also, what the antique fee is it 35 for registration?
40.
40. What's the registration fee for a street rod? How do they compare? I mean, is there going to be an additional fiscal note on this if we?
Yeah, well, theoretically, no. It'll take street rods and move them into antique. Street rods, off the top of my head, are $28 a year, and you have to pay that every year. It's not as much as a regular car, but an antique is $40 lifetime. So there would be some more money, which, again, like I said, should already be in that note, because that's what this bill is going to do, is basically abolish street rods.
All right, thank you very much.
Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two questions, if I could indulge it. If you, in your opinion, if you change out the engine, the drivetrain, transmission, if you change all those out, but replace it with a comparable
Vintage.
not necessarily vintage, but comparable, say a 302, 289 in a Ford. You take out a 289, put a 302 in. Same type, I think it's like a C6 engine or transmission, and the drivetrain is basically the same. Are you altering it to where it's not an, what you would call an antique, if you're updating that?
Pardon me, I worked with the patrol decades ago now, when we come up with a definition of how we were going to allow antiques to be fixed. Because, yeah, it's harder and harder to find parts. At that time, we used, that's why I said vintage. We used the word vintage, and we defined vintage to be, for example, if it was a 1955 vehicle, you could take a motor from a 52 all the way up to a 58, or transmission, and put it in there. And that would be considered, you kept vintage parts in the car. So that's the way we addressed that. So if it fell into that definition, because, yeah, they're constantly changing, you know, you went from a 327 to a 350. It's the same motor. It is, you know, a little bit more cubic engine, but it's still a 350 is a 327. So on and so forth. I don't know Ford, but yeah. So I'd say as long as it was in that 7-year period and you changed it out, yeah, that would still be an antique.
One more question. If we're not talking, I want to talk a little about street rods, because I don't know as much about the antique, but I've looked at a lot of them, and street rods to me are basically they found it in a field or a barn somewhere. It's rusted out, and they do just enough, which to me, the way I've seen these, is to put a big engine in there that makes it run real quick, and then put a transmission drive. But they basically leave the body, at least outward, the same. Is that changing anything? Or is that what, or is that your, let me add this way, is that your definition of a street rod?
What you described?
Yeah.
Yes, that's a street rod.
Okay.
If it's, by law, if it's a 1949 or older, I think it should be, if it's 35 years old or older and that's happened, it should be a street rod. But the law right now caps that out.
Why do you say 1929?
1949?
49.
That's what the law says. That's in 8-195.
So it's 1949.
1949 and older, you do what you said, you made a street rod. You get a 50 or newer, you're not an antique, you're not a street rod, you're nothing, you're just a car. I don't think that's right, myself.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Proctor.
So I just want to make sure I understood what your testimony was in light of those questions. If we were to pass this bill and it were become law, you know, after passage in both houses, that none of that matters anymore. Everything's an antique. Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure I understood.
Representative Delberdang.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of questions. I appreciate you being here. One, I'll make a comment. The bill itself does say more than 35 years old. So I think that hits in with what
Yeah, that's because that's what the law says. That part wasn't amended. So, yeah.
Right, exactly. So the part being amended is regardless of the age or the type of components or equipment installed on the vehicle. But with what you get into, and obviously you know your way around on the automobiles, and you and I could spar back and forth, and I'd love to do that. But your opinion, if I'm a trooper and I pull over I'm going to say a 69 Camaro, and it's got a newer vintage LS3 motor or something in it, would the average trooper out there be able to intelligently know how to check things over on the roadside? Or is that going to constitute more harassment for the owner of the vehicle? Because that's what's...
Well, I'm trying to think of a way to answer that question that would be relative. That would be about the same as you and I and everybody else in this room opening up the hood and looking at it and going, what kind of motor is that? How many people in here? Are the troopers trained on that? My answer is going to be no, they're not mechanics, they're law enforcement officers. Now, if you get a hobbyist or a shade tree mechanic who happens to be a trooper, he'll know more than a trooper who doesn't know anything about other cars other than you got to change the spark plugs and change the oil on a regular basis. You know, and it might not even know how to do it.
But isn't that part of the current problem? The trooper number one may be a real expert on it. Trooper number two, don't know, don't care.
I agree. That's part of the problem. I also am concerned that the way this is written, it's going to make that worse because of the fact of, we've already mentioned the front, you got to have the VIN number. VIN number, where is it at? It can be on older vehicles. It can be on top of the frame, which means the body's sitting on top of the VIN number. That created a problem. That's the reason for the distinction in the inspection law that if the vehicle is, I think it's 49 and older, it doesn't require to be inspected if it's bought on a bill of sale. Kansas lets you buy an antique on a bill of sale. If it's a 50 or newer and you bought it on a bill of sale, it's got to be inspected because they can see the VIN number. But if that VIN number is not there, like on my car, they stripped down the firewall, they took the VIN number off. It's amazing the number of people would call me up when I was working in division vehicles and have a problem with the trooper. I said, well, where's the VIN number? Well, I stripped the firewall. I said, you needed to get it inspected before you did that. And you should have told them, oh, by the way, you might as well assign me a VIN number because let me rephrase it. I think if they saw the VIN number, the patrol can reissue the same VIN number because they saw it. Now they're going to move it, and they can move it. You and I can't. But you got to do that before you start working on it. Then you get the problem of people will start a project on the car and then decide this is way over my head, so they sell it. Well, the car is in parts. It's not put together, theoretically, it's not a vehicle, and the patrol won't inspect it because it's not a vehicle. It's a box full of parts. Might be the whole back end of the truck and a trailer with the frame on it, but they're going to say and they're right, that's not a vehicle. It takes 2/3 of the major component parts still assembled to be a vehicle. You have to have a title if you have 2/3 of the vehicle, which I've already said is the body, the frame, and the motor. If you got 2 of those 3 parts, you got to have a title.
Mr. Wilk, we appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you
very much. I'm sorry, you have one more question?
No, Mr. Chairman, I had another question for the revisor, if I may.
Okay.
Chris, do you have access to the fiscal note?
No, I do not at the moment.
Okay, I will catch him another time, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Oh,
Okay, I think we have Mr. Blick on ready now. So, Mr. Blick, welcome to the committee.
Chairman, Representatives, this is Joshua Blick. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, great. Sorry about that. I appreciate you guys listening to me today and speaking. My name is Joshua Blick. I reside at 2039 South Everett in Wichita, Kansas. I'm the owner of Automobilia and Kansas Car Shows. It's one of the largest car shows in the state of Kansas. This came about, I kind of started this a couple of years ago, and this came about, a buddy of mine was coming back from Garden City and seeing his granddaughter at college, and he has a 67 Camaro. And when he was coming back, he has aftermarket tires and wheels, and he has an antique tag on his car. So he purchased, this was his high school car he's had for all of his life. He went and purchased probably 10 years ago aftermarket tires and wheels, and he had an antique tag on it. He got pulled over by a highway patrol officer. Highway patrol officer said, you cannot have aftermarket tires and wheels on an antique vehicle with an antique tag. And he goes, well, what do you mean? And so he went out, printed out the law. Law states, it says you can even change the tires and wheels. So ultimately, when we're talking about this antique bill, we're talking about safety concerns, because originally that 67 Camaro came out with bias ply tires. And if you want bias ply tires back on the highways, I think that's why they were unsafe at the time, and so they decided to go to radials and new inventions and everything else, and made the technology nowadays is a lot safer on the road and make these roadworthy. So a lot of these classic cars with antique tags in the state of Kansas, and I can tell you, I have one of the largest car shows in the state of Kansas, and 70 to 80% of every single classic car owner with an antique tag is running illegal right now. Highway patrol officers know this. I can tell you by fact, Pala had a car show, and as soon as all the classic car owners left, the highway patrol officers were on the side of the road, and they were pulling them over left or right. If they had any type of modifications, if they had different tires and wheels, if they had even a different paint job from originally, they wrote them tickets and told them they got a month to get it done. My buddy was lucky that he kept his cool on the side of the road about the situation, and the officer said, hey, I can impound your vehicle, and then also if I wanted to, I could go all the way to extreme and have you retitle your vehicle as a 2018 Chevy Camaro, and now you have to pay property taxes. So he kept his cool, and the officer gave him a ticket and let him go down the road. This is a $3 billion industry by SEMA standards when it comes to aftermarket parts. If you think about AutoZone, you think about the tire and wheel industry, you think of body and paint. Tim Devlin, he builds, $500,000 cars. He takes the original car and then rebuilds it and puts that much money and tax revenue back into the economy. But when it comes down to it is, I've met so many people that have purchased vehicles from out of the state of Kansas. And they get to a point where they have to go to the tag office. They'll go and get inspected. They see, we're not talking VIN number, but even just tires and wheels, or even a different job or whatever from the factory. I met a guy who has a 32T bucket, and now he had to sue the state of Kansas just to be able to have an inspection. And then when he gets an inspection, then he could go and get it actual titled in the state of Kansas. After he just spent $32,000 on a vehicle, now he has it registered as a 2018 Model T just because he had a different paint job and tires and wheels. And so now he's went and repainted the car close to the original, and we're not talking about lead paint, we're talking about the newer paint. So that still doesn't make him legal. Unless we go back to the original. I know the previous speaker was speaking about, if a motor is close, if you're in a 52 Ford and you put a different motor in, and you put a 53 motor from a Ford and they change to a different style of compression, whatever. Actually, that's in the law too that states you cannot do that. You have to have everything original for that year, if you look at the law on that. But I've met recently some guys that, a guy that's an inventor, a Kansas native. He's made like a little e-charger you can put on a motor, on any motor, and he increased his fuel economy from 200 to 300%, and he's getting 30 to 40 miles per gallon on these vintage vehicles. He can't put it on vehicles because of the law that sets on the vintage industry. So now he's looking at moving to Kansas. So we're starting to see a trend with classic cars is they're not putting them out there. They're not going to car shows. They're not showing them, or they're retagging them in other states because other states have less leniency when it comes to what an antique actually is. Most insurance companies now are saying 25 years and older is considered an antique. But definitely, I don't want to beat the water too much, and you guys heard a lot of testimony already in some statements. So I really appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing what we could do for House Bill 2165. And I appreciate all of your guys' support. And last year also with the 124 to 1.
Anyone have any questions for Mr. Blick? Hearing none, thank you very much for presenting today, and I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I have no other proponents listed. Does anyone else wish to speak as a proponent? I have no opponents listed. Does anyone wish to speak as an opponent? See none. I have no neutral listed. Does anyone wish to speak as a neutral? Hearing none, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 2165 and open the hearing on House Bill 2167. Revisor Wagner.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris Wagner from the Revisor's Office. House Bill 2167 permits concrete mixer trucks to display a license plate on the front of a vehicle, and then requires, not just permits, dump trucks to display license plates on the front of the vehicle. Section 1 provides in subsection B4 that the license plate issued for a concrete mixer truck may be attached to either the front or the rear of the vehicle. And section B5 goes on to require a dump truck with a gross weight of 26,000 pounds or more to attach a license plate to the front of the vehicle. So that is a requirement, just to repeat that. And then subsection E allows for a warning citation from a law enforcement officer, which that warning citation will only be required through January 1 of 2022. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are there questions for the revisor? Hearing none, thank you. First proponent I have is Mr. Jerry Younger, Managing Director of Kansas Aggregate Producers and Kansas Association of Ready Mix Concrete. Welcome to the committee.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, committee members. Glad to be in front of this committee again. It's been a while since I've been in front of it. I am Jerry Younger. I'm the Managing Director of the Kansas Aggregate Producers Association, Kansas Ready Mix Concrete Association. Kansas Ready Mix Concrete Association represents 40 member companies, ready mix producers here in Kansas. Just a little bit of the history on this bill. Background, and Chairman Prell may have conveyed some of this when he introduced the bill last week. This bill was actually introduced last session on the Senate side, Senate Transportation Committee, Senate Bill 390. It was introduced within that committee. It passed out of the Senate chambers, came to this committee, and was scheduled for a hearing on the very day that things kind of got shut down with COVID last year. So we're back at it here. There are two pieces really to this bill, as Chris said. One piece is relevant to the concrete mixer trucks, which is why I'm here supporting it on behalf of our members. The other piece is the dump truck piece of it, and the Kansas Motor Carriers Association was the ones who added that part into it. last year, and I'll let them talk to the dump truck piece of it. This bill addresses an issue that many of our members are affected by and have been in the past, and anyone who's ever watched a ready-mix concrete truck discharge their load knows that there's a whole bunch of activity going on the back end of a ready-mix concrete truck for those that have rear discharges. And you can just imagine that a license plate back there on the back end of a ready-mix concrete mixer truck is in harm's way to a certain extent. So our members have been affected by this. They've lost license plates, either became damaged or lost due to all that activity on the back end. And in fact, one of my members who you'll hear testimony from here shortly will provide some specific instances of how he and his company has been affected by it. Having the benefit of gone through a hearing last year on this, I'll just bring up a couple of comments or questions that were asked last year that might hit off maybe some of those same questions this year, specifically as it applies to the concrete mixer trucks. One of the questions was, well, can't you just put the license plate higher up on the frame of the back end of the mixer truck? And the answer is really perhaps in some configurations, but as you can imagine, there's a number of different manufacturers of mixer trucks. And the back end looks different from manufacturer to manufacturer. There may be some opportunity to put them higher up. Some of the other ones, configurations, you wouldn't really have any place to put it higher up. The other question that came up was concerning the idea of being able to let a producer decide if they want to put it on the front or the back, which is what the bill currently says, is that they have the option. In my testimony, which you have, there's a picture on why you wouldn't want to put it at the front for the same reason you wouldn't want to put it at the back for some mixer trucks, in that we do have some mixer trucks in the state that are front discharge. All the activity is happening on the front end there. So having the option, depending on the mixer truck type that you're using, would be what we're after as far as the ready-mix concrete industry is concerned. As my testimony said, there are roughly probably about 500 plus or minus concrete mixer trucks in the state of Kansas that would be impacted or affected by this. I'd also note, as in my testimony, that the current statute that talks about displaying license plates already allows license plates to be displayed on the front of some vehicles, those tractor trailer vehicles. So rather than read my testimony, you've got it, and I'll be happy to stand for any questions when the time's appropriate.
Further questions? Representative Howe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Younger, thank you for being here. I'm a new member of this committee, so I'm learning my way around. But do your concrete trucks also have to display a USDOT number on them?
They do. I'll have our next conferee confirm that, who actually has a ready-mix concrete company.
Okay, thank you.
Answer that.
Are there any further questions for Mr. Younger? Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obvious question. What's the highway patrol
Last year, I did visit with both the law enforcement group and the highway patrol. They had some concerns, and really they were the ones that suggested maybe just saying it has to be on the front or the back instead of having it on either one. I think at the end of the day, they were willing to accept the bill as, I don't want to put words in their mouth, but willing to accept the bill as passed last year.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next proponent is Justin Crane. He'll be joining us virtually. He has American Concrete in Pittsburgh, Kansas. Welcome to the committee. Okay, we'll move on to our next proponent and let Mr. Younger maybe give him a call or text him. Our next proponent would be Mr. Tom Whitaker. He's the Executive Director of the Kansas Motor Carriers Association. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will be brief. I am Tom Whitaker, Executive Director, Kansas Motor Carriers. We're here to issue our support of House Bill 2167, especially the dump truck rule. As you know, we are a contractor for the state and issue a bunch of truck tags out of our office. And we have a lot of replacement tags that come in, and a lot of them are from dump truck operators. And that because of the tail and all the load that goes out the back of it, this would require front license tags on a dump truck, a straight truck, over 26,000 pounds. There is a bonus for a commercial vehicle by putting it on the front. Is one of the safety regulations says you have to have a license tag bracket and a light on that license tag bracket on the back of a truck. Dump trucks are notorious for destroying that light, and that light is a violation of the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Regs if it doesn't work. By putting it on the front, that is not required. So it is a benefit for violations as well as keeps the tag from being destroyed. Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to respond to questions.
Are there questions for Mr. Whitaker? Representative Delperdane.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tom, thank you for being here. It's good to see you. Just a curiosity question. We've heard with obviously concrete trucks. Now you're talking about dump trucks. In your opinion, were your motor carriers in general, I was thinking on the previous testimony, are there other vehicles that we need to be considering to include in this? I'd just like to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, earlier in discussions, we talked about, when I was talking to the Senate, when we were talking about doing the bill, period, and amending Jerry's bill, we talked about tow trucks and some others. We decided we would start here and see who else wants it. But I do know that members of ours that operate dump trucks do want this, and to limit what we do it with on front tags.
Okay, I appreciate
and that was the thought process.
Okay.
Are there further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Younger, do you know if, were you able to get a hold of Mr. Crane?
Yes, Justin said that he's unmuted and that he turned on his video. So, Mr. Chair, rather than kind of hold up things, I'd be happy just to submit Justin's testimony as written testimony.
Would you like to have a copy of it too?
Yes.
I think I handed you the right one.
So I'm not going to do Justin credit here, but Justin Crane is part of a family-owned operation in Pittsburgh, Kansas, American Concrete. Many, many years, a member of KRMCA, plus many, many years in business in the Pittsburgh area. And you've got Justin's testimony. Obviously, he's had some impacts due to license plates that have either gotten lost or damaged or whatever. And time and money that he's spent dealing with those license plate issues. Justin also included some pictures of a truck in his fleet with his testimony there. And again, kind of going back to my comment, you can see that there's really not a good place to put the tag amongst anything there on the back end. So just confirming once again, the idea of moving it to the front probably gets it out of harm's way.
Anybody have any comments or questions to Mr. Younger? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
Committee, I don't have any other proponents listed. Does anyone wish to speak as a proponent? Seeing none, I have no opponents listed. Does anyone wish to speak as an opponent? None there, and I have no neutral. Does anyone wish to speak neutral? Seeing none, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 2167. Committee, we will be meeting tomorrow, and I plan to do final action on House Bill 2107, 2164, 2165, and 2167. And just so you can think about this over the weekend, we will be meeting on Tuesday, February 9th, and we will hear House Bill 2015, 2166, 2169, and 2194. Is there any further business to come before the Representative Hoheisel?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can you repeat those that we will be hearing next week again?
Yes.
You got it, Leo. Okay, I'll get it from Leo right after. Leo's
Just
got
give
it.
me the first.
Okay.
I'll run them by if you want to begin. We will be hearing House Bill 2015, 2166, 2169, and 2194. And if we get another one ready in between now and then, these are license plates. We will bring it in also.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay. No further business to come before the committee. We are adjourned.